Hello. Hello.
Yeah, that's okay. It's just everyone's profile.
Hello. What? Hello.
Yeah, I can hear. Yeah, we can share this. Oh, that's so noisy. I'm gonna stop sharing, by the way.
Yeah, I don't see what Imran will actually hear and he was popped out of nowhere.
Yeah, no, I'm doing it online. I'm just gonna pop out.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
Makes
yeah.
sense. Lovely to meet you, man. And thank you for organising this as well.
Oh, no, thank you for approaching us.
Yeah, we want to try and educate people about time.
Yeah,
Online,
exactly.
hopefully we can get something right.
Yeah.
I'll leave you to it.
Hey guys, we could just share this between you two.
Yeah,
Maybe
absolutely.
share with Rob.
No, that's fine. That's really cute. Part of me was hoping it was a vape.
After this, I'll take this off and we can do that.
I don't mind.
There's gonna be
There's
a
nothing
poster.
But there is no poster. Kenneth's getting cold feet, bless him.
So am I. It is 6:30. All the way 5 minutes. Yeah. Okay. I want to talk 5 more minutes.
Hey guys, thank you for coming. We'll start in 5 minutes if that's okay. So yeah.
I think we could start now.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. 10 minutes trying to get everyone to calm down. You need to invite students next time. That's the hack.
The recording? Okay, no, just stop.
All right, thank you for coming, everyone. It's been a hectic week. I'm sure some of you know, but hopefully this event calms things down. Um, so yeah, I'm Imran. For those who don't know, president of Imperial Blockchain Society. We've been a society for less than 6 months now, and it's been a wild ride. We've been doing a bunch of things, and and yeah, this is one of those events that we're having. I can see a lot of people, like external people who aren't students, coming in. Hope you guys are enjoying London. If you're coming from like somewhere else, I know a lot of you are coming from Token 2049. Um, Sadly, coursework is preventing me from being there, but I'm there in spirit. And yeah, let's just get into it. So, Animoca brands have kindly come in and agreed to share their insights on the metaverse and Web3 gaming in general. Um, and so I thought I'd just introduce Animoca brands just to start. Um, So yeah, Animoca Brands, a Deloitte Tech Fast winner and ranked in the Financial Times list of high growth companies, is a leader in the digital entertainment, blockchain, and gamification industry. And they are working to advance digital property rights and contribute to the establishment of the open metaverse. The company develops and publishes a broad portfolio of products, including the Rev token and the Sand token. Original games including the Sandbox, I'm sure most of you know what the Sandbox is, Crazy Kings and Crazy Defense Heroes, and products utilizing popular intellectual properties, including Disney, WWE, Snoop Dogg, The Walking Dead, Power Rangers, MotoGP, and Formula E. The mission on their website states to deliver digital property rights to the world's gamers and internet users, thereby creating a new asset class, play-to-earn economies, and a more equitable digital framework, contributing to the building of the open metaverse. And yeah, I'll also introduce our panelists. We have Robbie Young on the left, the CEO of North American operations at Animoca Brands. Robbie has served as CEO of Animoca since 2014 and has been instrumental in guiding the company through its different stages of development, providing exceptional leadership through Animoca Brands, many investments and acquisitions. And then in the middle, we have Kenneth Sheck. Kenneth leads projects at Animoca Brands across all verticals, including gaming, music and entertainment, sports and fitness and education. And he was previously a co-founder of an AI machine learning software as a service product company. And then to my left here, we have Mo Mohammed. He heads the tokenomics team at Animoca. He's a mathematician by training. Mo's passion is building tomorrow's economy through tokenization and has been working deep in the tokenomics space since 2018. From concept and strategy around economy design and token frameworks spanning white paper creation, commercial and legal guidance, Mo and his team's experience and skill sets run the gamut. And so yeah, those are our panelists for you. If you could just have a short round of applause for them. And yeah, once again, thank you for coming. So this panel, for those who don't know, is dedicated to answering the following question. What is the open metaverse? So yeah, the metaverse has been one of those terms that gets thrown around nowadays. But its definition has been somewhat contested by a lot of different people. It's a bit like a snowflake. No one definition is the same. But who better to answer the question than the leading brand in the space, Animoca? And so I direct this question just to start us off. How would you guys define the open metaverse?
Okay, I draw the short straw, huh? Okay, so the open metaverse, this is working, okay. So I think the best way to think about it is the idea of a metaverse as opposed to the web or the internet is all in the word open. It's about openness and inclusivity, and I think we mean that not just from a content standpoint, but also from a technology standpoint. So I think Web3, and specifically, being defined as the usage of blockchain in order to tokenize content and to give digital property rights over content, I think this is an inextricable part of the metaverse, because we have great 3D experiences already in Web 2. You can play games like Fortnite and Roblox and any, MMO game, and they give you great realistic 3D experiences, but these are all siloed entertainment experiences. And the same thing is true of social media and other kinds of walled gardens. But I think, why would we call something the metaverse? The metaverse is a big overarching concept where we include everything that we do on the internet. And specifically, often we talk about a 3D internet in this case. And so if this is all underpinned by Web3, then it allows us to have interoperable content from experience to experience. And so we can take our digital stuff from place to place. And this is a really important transition because, once we start taking things out of those silos and allowing them to interoperate with each other, then we start to have something that is much more like a metaverse. So often I get asked, because we have a project called the Sandbox, which is a user-generated content environment. You can create lots of different experiences. It's a big, broad, diverse environment. And so people ask me, is that the metaverse? And I say to them, definitely no, it's not. It feels like a metaverse, but it's actually just part of it, right? So if you think of the metaverse as the earth or the world, the Sandbox is hopefully a really important city, right? Maybe it's a London or a Tokyo or a New York. There are lots of people there. There's lots of economic activity. There's lots of culture and things to do, but it's just one place. And there are going to be many, many other places that are also interesting and diverse. And what defines us as the metaverse, in my view, is our ability then to move between those different places and those different experiences, just the same way that we, travel in the physical world from place to place. And when we travel, we expect we can put all our stuff in our car and go and bring our stuff. And so why shouldn't we be able to bring our digital stuff from place to place? So I think that's an important part of it. And we will experience this metaverse through many different kinds of platforms. Again, it's about being open and inclusive. So we will experience it on mobile, on desktop, all kinds of different platforms. VR is one of those, but I think VR particularly will be a relatively niche platform because it's quite high end and there's a lot of barriers to entry of cost and other things. So anyway, sorry, that was a really long answer.
I think there's testing. Yeah, it's working. I think Robbie gave quite an articulate answer for sure. I think in addition to that, the open metaverse is anything you want it to be as well, depending on what experience you want to have. What we've seen with COVID is we were all locked away and a lot of our experiences were online and we were missing that human element or that human interaction. Something else, we've recently opened our London office and met a lot of our colleagues for the first time. And the reason I'm mentioning this is we've known each other through a screen, but you've never actually met some of these people. So Kenneth, we met for the first time last week. And for me, the open metaverse isn't just in an online setting. It's a mix between online and IRL. So actually meeting people in real life, because there's a different feeling to when you meet someone online. And I mean, how many people have you met and they've been taller or shorter than what you expected them to be? I mean, I know I've been duped numerous times when you meet somebody, you think they're going to be like 6'4" because their camera angle makes them look like a giant, and it's like, oh wait, I can fit you in my pocket. And then other times it's the exact opposite. Like I thought Kenneth would be a few inches shorter than I am. I was wrong. So it's definitely about experiences, and each of us, we have different experiences or different things we want to experience. Something else, another, I guess, buzzword we talk about is tribes, especially within crypto and Web3, and what tribe do you belong to? I'm 34 years old, and I remember when I was in secondary school, there were only 4 or 5 tribes you could belong to. You either belong to one of the footballing group, or you belong to like the really clever kids, or back then it was Pokemon and Harry Potter, that's what was hot, so you were in that group. You couldn't really be across multiple different groups. But we're complex creatures, and trying to simplify us down to you belong to a single tribe doesn't work. So this idea of interoperability actually allows us to be part of multiple different tribes at the same time. And within these multiple tribes, you get to find different experiences and different people to have those experiences with. So I think these are different, I guess, culminations of what the metaverse could be.
Yeah, so agree with all of the above. And also, I think I just talked to someone I met in Lisbon, and then he actually asked me the same question: what is the open metaverse, and how do you define it, right? I guess like how I would like to look at it is really you own the asset and you can bring it anywhere you want, and we don't stop anyone from bringing their asset to our platform or bringing our asset to someone else's platform. He asked the question like, how do you stop like a large game publisher from creating their own ecosystem and lock the users within their ecosystem? I guess like the answer is you don't stop them because it's an open metaverse, right? And at the end, the open metaverse is large enough that cover utilities not only in gaming but also your day-to-day life, such as sports and entertainment, education, healthcare, your daily habits that you actually spend time in the metaverse. That can beat everything, right? Like at the end, is the user choosing to bring their assets to the open metaverse because they can get more value out of it. And at the end, it requires open metaverse is not just a statement, but also requires like the how, right? Like how do you actually make it happen? Right, so we also talk about having a standard, and I guess we can dig a little bit deeper into it later.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Those are very good answers. Mo and Robbie, you both mentioned interoperability. For people who aren't familiar with the term, would you mind defining what that means?
Sure. I guess simply put, it means bringing your digital stuff from one place to another. But if you think about it in terms of, let's say, 2 games, right? So you have 2 games that are, car racing games. And so you own virtual cars and drive them on virtual tracks. And the idea is that you can take your cars from one game to race them on that track to another game and race them on those tracks over there. And today you can't do that because typically the games don't talk to each other, and there's no system for which you can transfer those assets because they only exist inside the ecosystem of a specific game environment. And so that kind of interoperability is really important. Now, that functionality can be offered in a non-open version, right? One game company could decide to make multiple games and create a login system and implement this themselves. So it's possible. There's no technical hurdle. But I think the idea that we're talking about with Web3 underpinning it is to have it be much more fair to consumers because it allows them to actually own the items that they're purchasing. Because one of the things which we didn't talk about, of course, is that games for many, many years have largely been based on rental economies. So even though you're paying money for those virtual items that you buy in games, you don't actually own them because you only have very limited rights over what you can do with that item. It must exist inside the game. You can only use it to play in a certain way. You can't sell it. You can't trade it. You can't, the terms and conditions are, 10 pages long. Whereas we emphasize open when we talk about open metaverse because when you own digital stuff, it should have all the properties of ownership. You should be able to do what you like with it. It's up to you. You own it. And that's a very important concept, sort of foundational concept.
Okay, thank you. And you also mentioned that the open metaverse isn't just necessarily a VR experience. And we have companies like Meta pushing this narrative. How else do you see people interacting with the metaverse? Is it through just their computers or their phones, or what sort of devices would you say people would ideally use to access the metaverse?
I think honestly anything, because I think we get informed a lot in terms of the future by science fiction. So when we watch movies like Ready Player One or Blade Runner or whatever it is, you get these visions of what the future might hold. And there is a very fantastical vision of us living in a virtual reality fully in 3 dimensions. But I think actually, the real innovation is going to be much more basic than that. And that's the digital property rights. Because I think that even experiencing the metaverse in a text form, is going to be transformational if that text form allows you to trade your own digital stuff, right? Just the same way you can have, your share trading account on a text-based page, and that has lots of value because you own those things. So I think it's the ownership part of digital assets, I think is really, really key. And that's why we'll be able to view it in many, many different ways.
I think to add to that, especially in terms of ownership, I think as a collective, we don't fully understand what ownership actually means and how important our data is to us, which is why sometimes hearing this doesn't feel like it's important. So I just want to ask everyone a quick question. Well, prior to doing that, who remembers a few years back when Facebook acquired WhatsApp? Do you remember? Yep. Do you also remember downloading Telegram, downloading Signal? We don't want Facebook to have our data. We're going to move. How many people still use WhatsApp? Okay, and that's exactly my point. We don't fully understand the value of our data. So I think it's within the education, and because it is such a complex space, because we're in an innovative space, and there's a lack of regulation, and there's a lack of actually having anything that's standardized within the space as well. And that means that there's more hurdles for us to cross, but we're slowly crossing those hurdles. And the big reason why we're here today as well is for the educational side of things. It's, again, I guess half the people here are students. I was a teacher for 10 years, and I can assure you, asking people to come into a classroom setting to learn is not the best way for anyone to learn. It's learning through experience. So based on that, if you don't own an NFT, maybe go out, have a read, understand what that is, and we're going to cover that a bit more as well. But one of the best ways to learn is via experience. So find a friend who maybe is into crypto, or into Web3, and they are slightly different things, and maybe have a discussion with them on their experiences, regardless if it's positive or negative. And speaking of negative experiences, crypto does have a bad rep in terms of being a scam, and unfortunately there have been a lot of scams in the space. I mean, I was reading an article on Twitter last week, I think it was, and in the height of the bull market on Uniswap, there were 3,000 tokens being launched a day. 3,000 tokens being launched a day, which is insane. And 97.9% of tokens launched on Uniswap in that period of time were rug pulls. What does that mean? It means you've paid money to buy these tokens, and whoever's invented or created or minted these tokens, they've then taken the liquidity, the money that you've paid, and your tokens are worthless. So when we talk about scams, there have been a lot of scams in the space, but that's why we see the cyclical nature in terms of the price or in terms of the hype cycles that we see. There's a lot of hype, a lot of retail money comes into the space. So retail money is more or less everyone here. We get excited, we're all going to make it, we're all going to get rich, and then it crashes, and then we build. And I think this is what's super important is right now we're in a building phase. And what's different this time in comparison to before is your Nikes are building, your Adidas are building in the space, Ubisoft are building in the space, a lot of the private banks have crypto trading desks. So actually what we're seeing is we're a lot closer to adoption. And a big reason for that is an innovation in technology in terms of NFTs. A lot of people can understand the value of NFTs from an application layer. So if I'm a musician, I understand that if I sign away, or if I sign with a record label, for example, I don't actually own the rights of my content. But if I was to upload my content in an NFT, I can then sell direct to the consumer in a P2P fashion. So we're slowly getting there.
Thank you. Speaking of getting involved in the space, my first ever involvement in the space was being on the Wall Street Bets Reddit and investing on Dogecoin. And now I'm sat at a panel speaking to these very lovely men from Animoca. So make of that what you will. You both touched on ownership and owning your in-game assets. So I wanted to ask you about intellectual property in the metaverse. What does that look like, and how do you make that like recognizable? Is it something you want to regulate, or is it something you want to enforce on chain, in terms of like who making something like immutably owned, or like how do you see something? How do you see ownership in the metaverse looking like in the future?
So I think property law is something that's got a very long precedent, right? Ever since, I guess, the Magna Carta. And so we've been working on it for a very long time. It's messy, but it works. And so I think there's a lot of precedent in case law in many countries around the world that enforce property rights. There are different ways that this is being executed in the blockchain world, and I've seen some interesting approaches to it. There's no perfect solution yet, but I think we're getting to that point. I think copyright is a slightly separate issue, and I think that copyright is something that's very much of the moment because people are talking about it, particularly in light of the fact that many marketplaces made the decision over the last couple of months not to respect creator royalties, which I think is a mistake on their part. Because frankly, one of the things about Web3 and the Web3 community is that I think we all share a philosophy of being able to create a relationship between parties and often between companies and customers, for example, or peer-to-peer with less friction in the middle. And this is not basically to say we want to cut out all middlemen, because middlemen and aggregators and platforms are great. But I think the idea is that they shouldn't necessarily have disproportionate benefit based on disabling access, right? Which we would call in economic terms rent-seeking behavior, right? What we want is we want to reduce friction and reduce fees so that creators can have a greater proportion of the benefit from the intellectual property that they create. And so I think that part of copyright is very important. And as a result, we also see innovation happening in the space with respect to copyright. So many of you may be familiar, there's a native Web3 project called the Bored Ape Yacht Club. And this is a project based on the dissemination of 10,000 images of bored apes in a yacht club. But the real invention was the idea that these images were distributed under a different kind of copyright license where the owners of each individual image own the copyright to their image. And this is very unusual because the historical tendency has been to build IP and then license IP, but the original creator owns all that IP. In this case, it's shared community ownership of the IP. And as each community member exploits their own individual ape for commercial purposes, it actually enhances the overall brand of the entire collection of the community. So the more the community members participate in commercializing their properties, the more everybody else benefits, and it creates a network effect. And so I think that's, one of the key actually innovations, in my opinion, that we've seen in the Web3 community over the last couple of years.
I guess from a regulation perspective as well, it's we can wait to be regulated from the outside, or we can start to self-regulate internally. And to that point, I think we have the Blockchain Gaming Alliance, which is one form of that. But something even bigger that's in the works is the Open Metaverse Alliance 3, which is essentially standing up to Facebook. We're saying they're building closed ecosystems. We're doing the exact opposite. We want to build the open metaverse, but we also understand that alone we cannot build the open metaverse. It's something we have to do together, and it's not just the buzzword of WAGMI. WAGMI is like we're all going to make it. If, for any of those who are not sure of what it meant, it's a genuine. How can I put it? It's a feeling. It's a philosophy. It's something you have to buy into, and I feel that's genuinely what's different about being in the Web3 space. Is people do want to make a difference, but then back to the point is. The purpose of this is can we govern ourselves, or do we have to wait for governance to come externally? And what's super interesting, what we're seeing now, especially in terms of, I guess, governance. I've used the same word about 20 times in 3 sentences, but we've had things like Brexit, and we've had things like Donald Trump, and this comes from binary choices. So even the way we vote dictates the outcome prior to there even being a vote. So from that sense, there's been innovations in the space like quadratic voting, something where it really gets you to think. And we're going to see a lot more of that, in my opinion, moving forward, where we're using completely new governance mechanics to reach consensus where everyone genuinely has a say.
I guess to add to that, agree with Mo that there are 2 streams, right? We shouldn't actually wait for the government to be like, okay, we recognize NFT as the ownership of the IP rights. But at the same time, like that's the beauty of blockchain, that you see which block actually goes first and who actually is the original creator of that content, right? So that's, I guess, like there are 2 ways to look at it. One way to look at it is actually from a legal point of view on paper, and another way to look at it is the perceived value of the asset and who is the original creator of it, right? So, and if you guys look at like the Hong Kong government actually talk about potentially they're looking at recognizing digital asset to be kind of like discussed at court and probably recognized at court as well for cases, right? So we definitely see regulator or kind of start to adopt, and we are pretty optimistic about that.
Great. Okay. Thank you. And in terms of digital assets in the metaverse and people owning them, what exactly does that look like? Does everything in the metaverse become ownable, or is it sort of you have this environment that's built by like developers or people who code, and then you build on top of that, and like the gamers have already set up this environment that can't be ownable? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the best analogy is to think of the physical world. Who owns all the stuff, right? So you have commercial enterprises, you have governments, we self-organize as communities, and we decide, oh, well, there's a little bit too much chaos, so maybe we need a police force. So we self-organize and appoint a police force, we start to levy taxes, and that pays for public services. And so why shouldn't we adopt those same principles into creating digital societies the same way we have a physical society? Because as messy and kind of ugly the physical world gets from time to time, it works pretty well, and we've been working on it for like what 2,000 years or so, and so there's no need for us to try to reinvent that. Many of these principles and the rule of law, etc., tend to work very well, and hopefully in online spaces we can start to employ a lot of those same concepts. I think of this a lot when I think of I've participated in a lot of industry meetings where people are talking about regulation, and one of the topics that always comes up is things like online harm and bullying and et cetera in online spaces. And one of the issues that I see with that is that in Web 2, because we have all these platforms, like if we go onto Facebook and we experience things on Facebook, we expect that it's Facebook's problem to police it because they've claimed ownership to everything, right? We own nothing. And so we have an expectation that it's their responsibility. But if you go to a physical shop, right, if you're the shop owner and somebody comes into your shop and starts creating trouble, you as the shop owner feel a sense of responsibility that, hey, I'm going to kick this guy out of my shop. He's creating trouble for my customers. And if it gets really out of hand, maybe he calls the police. But there's a sense of ownership over your space that you have some obligation to maintain that space. But if you don't own it, look at how people drive rental cars, right? If you don't own it, then you don't treat it responsibly. So ownership matters in that sense. And I think that when we start to think about online spaces, this transformation from not owning things to owning things will have a big impact on how we treat each other also in virtual space.
Okay. Yeah, I have a couple of questions just off of that. So, firstly, you say when people own things, like as opposed to owning things, do you see things in the metaverse being public? So like public goods, like like you mentioned the physical.
Yes, which is actually just all of us owning it.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, and then just leading on from that, if you were to own something, does it necessarily have to have monetary value? And if it does, then how does the sort of relationship between a user and their assets feel like, and then look like, and then what does the relationship between user to user look like when they're, I guess, trading that asset? Yeah.
Sure. I think the subject of value is a very slippery slope because there's monetary value and then there is, personal value, right? Objects that are personal to me may have more value to me because they have my life experience in them. Like, my home may have value to me because I've lived in it for a long time. And so it's different from just a roof over my head. So I think assessing what that value is in monetary terms is very, very complicated. But I think the important thing is that through this process of digital ownership, we can start to at least have a system or a framework under which we can define some of those values. It doesn't mean that everything must have a value, though, per se. Because we could agree, for example, to self-organize as a community and say, this is our community space here, and it doesn't have a value because no one person's allowed to own it because it's for the benefit of everybody.
Yeah. And how about in play to earn gaming? I guess you would say play to earn gaming is a subset of the metaverse. Would you agree, or?
I would say it's an economic model that you can use to design certain kinds of games.
Okay, yeah, and we've seen historically tokenomics in play to earn games not work out, or maybe like there've been experiments, and so how do you see that? Yeah, head of tokenomics right here. How do you see tokenomics evolving to create sustainable models which improve the user experience as opposed to front running Ponzinomics?
I think first and foremost is to understand that what the user wants, and essentially when we go into a game ecosystem, unless you're an esports player or you're gambling, you do not play to earn. So I think that's super important. So the concept got penned in, but realistically what we're aiming for is play and earn, because the emphasis should always be on the fun. A lot of the blockchain games that were released, and I hope I'm not saying blockchain games, we can just say games moving forward, that were released off of how, yeah, you're right, Ponzinomics. It's let's sell something, let's wait for more people to come in, and as long as more money is getting pumped in, it's fine. It's a pyramid scheme. As soon as the money stops, it all falls apart. It's a house of cards. So it's understanding where the value actually is actually at, and also understanding that when you're rewarding someone, you have to be rewarding them for genuine actions in an ecosystem, not you've signed in, here's some tokens. I mean, Stepan, for example, you'd walk for 10 minutes, and at the height, you'd get maybe over $100 just for signing into the app and walking for 10 minutes. How does that make any sense that I've gone to walk for 10 minutes and I've earned $100? But what that then creates is a lot of hysteria, thinking, well, I want to get into this because there's free money. I just need to open this app, walk for 10 minutes, and I'm making money. And then we saw the NFTs that enabled you to be able to earn, which were shoes. They've I forgot 2, 3. What was at the height? Do you know? It was in the thousands of dollars. And what was even more interesting is you could actually breed these shoes. So only in Web3 can you breed shoes. And then, but then the other side is it's looking at genuine, and this is what we can look at Web 2 is what revenue models exist. And within some aspects, you've got advertising. So one model that we've created with one of our game studios is a rev share of the advertising money based on the amount of time that they spend. And again, it's a gamified experience because that way we're not relying on other users coming in to fund the ecosystem. We have that money coming in from elsewhere. I mean, when you spin up a token, you're creating money from thin air, but how do you sustain that? And it's not by giving out crazy rewards at the beginning for actions that do not add any value, because what you're seeding is the wrong kind of, you're seeding the wrong, I don't know if my mind's gone blank, the wrong, yes, the wrong incentives. But even then, we don't enter an ecosystem more often for incentives. We're motivated to enter an ecosystem. But in play to earn or move to earn or whatever to earn, you're coming in purely for the incentive. And that means you're seeding the wrong type of actions that now I've come in just to make money, not to add any value. And yeah, things fall apart from there. So it's genuinely looking at what the value add is within these ecosystems, who are the different stakeholders within these ecosystems, how do these guys and girls interact with one another, and then we can start to design something a bit more sustainable, as opposed to just pump it, we're all gonna get rich, woo, let's go. Yeah, it works until it doesn't.
Maybe if I can add something, just if you think about the traditional game industry, games for decades now, as long as we've had the free-to-play model, where you spend money in games and then to enhance your experience, and you continue to spend in games over time to enhance the experience or upgrade your characters or things like that. As game developers, we've always thought about the market being loosely divided into two different kinds of categories. Players who have lots of money and less time, and players who have lots of time and very little money. And so game economies have traditionally been designed around trying to marry those two, because the people who have money can afford to buy all the upgrades and advance in the game quickly through spending money, and those are good because they provide revenues to the game developer. But you also want to have lots of people playing, because if you go into a battle royale game and there's nobody there, there's no point. You want to have lots of players. So you try to build a healthy ecosystem that can cater to everybody and has something for everybody to offer. And I think when you think about these play and earn games, another way to think about it is, here's a way for people to actually be recognized for that time that they're spending in games. They're not just spending time, basically being, defeated as members of armies or whatever it is. You could actually think of those gamers that have money, spending the money to hire somebody else in a game to grind away for 3 hours and defeat the boss, because you don't have time to do that. You just want to get to the next level, right? So rather than just paying an IAP to do that, you can hire somebody else to do that. And now that we have an in-game economy through tokenomics that facilitates that peer-to-peer transaction, then you actually can generate work, because one player can hire another player to do a job for them. And this is just, this is in a game context, but obviously we can extrapolate this to all kinds of digital work.
And through that, you actually have a lot of gaming guilds that have come up that basically do this. They outsource the gaming experience to people who want to earn. And on top of that, like a lot of these games, they also have very high barriers to entry. So like, for example, in Axie, you have to pay a certain amount. It's probably not as much now, but like before you had to pay, like I think $1,000 to get three pets.
Yep.
And then you needed the 3 pets to start. And the whole ethos of a metaverse is that anyone can enter, right? And so do you see the shift in making it easier for users to enter, or do you see guilds as a way of allowing people to enter into the space?
I think the space is so early that we end up with unintended consequences, and then we try to solve problems. And I think that's what you see in Axie Infinity. So what happened was they started selling cute digital pets that you could battle and breed, and the price just went nuts, and they never expected that when they came up with the game. It was just supposed to be a fun game. And then they thought, okay, so how do we solve this problem? Because nobody can afford to buy these things anymore. So they came up with a rental system, and they came up with guilds, and they came up with other new innovations in order to try to solve those problems. But I think a lot of it was because, a lot of these technologies are being designed on the fly.
Seems to be that like there's a lot of breeding in the metaverse. But yeah, I went to Solana break when Kenneth was there as well, and you guys touched on it before, royalties. How do you see the royalties landscape evolving? Do you see people accepting that, you know, royalty suppression, or do you see it as people fighting back?
Oh, I think people will favor royalties, and I think that also this depends on your age. So, and I may be wrong, being in a room full of young people, but I think the younger you are, the more open you are to the idea that creators deserve to be paid for their creations. I think that we've had a couple of generations of people now who've grown up in an environment where digital content has no value. It's considered to be free because we've not had a proper way technically to protect copyright. And so therefore, you know, a JPEG is not worth anything because you can replicate it infinitely. If there was a way to protect it, why should it be any different, you know, in digital form than it is in physical form hanging on your wall? It's still a creation that took a creator time and energy to make. And so that should be respected. I think if you look at the royalty example, a good case outside of Web3 is actually Taylor Swift re-recording her masters. And now I think the market and her fans have voted with their feet, so to speak, and they choose to consume her re-recorded music that she owns because they know and understand that that benefits her as the creator.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. I was reading an article yesterday by Arthur Hayes. I don't know if you guys have read it, but he proposes, and I guess you guys have touched on it a bit. He proposes like a new model for games, and it's instead of play to earn, and you guys mentioned play and earn. He mentions play to own. And so people who engage with games or like the metaverse or some digital land, the most are sort of incentivized because in the long term, they are promised some stake in that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I just want to say, like, my team and most team we have been talking like all day, all weeks, all months on a daily, hourly basis about this. Like, how do we lower the barrier? So basically, everyone has the right to play the game, right? Everyone has the right to own their assets, and we talked about like having tier systems. If someone wants to jump the queue and save some time, they can do it. We have the option. So I think being open. More importantly, is not enforcing them to do something or not to do something, is really giving them the option in the game.
And to add to that as well, it really does depend on the IP and what the game is. In some instances, you do want to have token gated games specific to IP holders or NFT holders because that's what they get for being part of that community. And in other games, it's the exact opposite. We want to open source it as much as possible to bring in as many people as possible so we can add more value to that. I want to go back to something we were talking about earlier because I think it's super important. When we talk about the metaverse reflecting reality, throughout history, every time a civilization has fallen, it's fallen because the currency at the time, or the predominant currency at the time, has fallen out of favor. We see this back then when they'd mint gold coins, for example, and then by the end of that dynasty, there is no gold left. It's copper, it's silver, and it's down to inflation, but it's also down to a central, I don't use the word bank, but a central entity that's in control of what that monetary policy looks like. What we really have, and a platform now and an opportunity, is to not have a central figure deciding what that looks like, but have multiple microeconomies based on different game ecosystems or metaverse ecosystems where the community gets to decide what those economies look like. And for me, that's super exciting because we're going to see a lot of things failing, but from failure, we learn. And it's something else within the space is also having a growth mindset, which is understanding that you win or you learn. If you see something as a failure, then you've not learned from that mistake. So we need to make mistakes. We have to iterate. We have to be open source. We have to be open and honest. Two minds working out a problem, or is it a problem shared as a problem halved? I think it is. Now imagine you get 1,000 people working on that, and so on and so forth. So we really have an opportunity to break with tradition and not see the rise and fall of economies at scale.
I think, and going on that, I think one of the reasons that we've had so much success in the Web3 industry in a relatively short amount of time is because of the open source nature of it and this spirit of working together and problem solving as a community. Because I think that everybody in the Web3 space understands that because of the interoperability of content and economies in games or applications, we all do this for the network effect of mutual benefit. And so, together we can solve problems and innovate much, much faster than if we're working in a silo and not sharing our information or anything with anybody else. I mean, if you think about it, you just hang out on Discord or Twitter or GitHub or anywhere, and you can see the innovation happening because you get thousands and thousands of smart people looking at solving problems in real time, as opposed to, how many engineers can one company hire to solve a problem? You just can't compare.
Thank you. You guys have mentioned a lot of abstract concepts and talking about innovation. Do you guys mind delving into a specific project or projects that you're excited about working in the space, and perhaps delving into how they're solving a tokenomics problem or how they're solving user retention problems?
So I think one of our AAA games where Phantom Galaxies, quick show of hands, who's heard of Phantom Galaxies? Okay, a few of us. So Phantom Galaxies.
Aside from us.
So the innovation in Phantom Galaxies, it's you buy a planet within it's a mecha-based game. You buy a planet, but what's super interesting here is the tokens that you can essentially earn via gameplay are locked to the planet. So your planet is emitting your rewards. So it's not the case of I own something and I'm getting rewarded for free. I still need to be working. And to Robbie's point, if I don't have time to work, I can now hire someone or an army of people to be doing that work. And then they get a share in the economic value of those tokens that are released. So that's a big innovation. Back to Axie again. Axie always gets blasted, but what people don't realize, if Axie didn't do what Axie did, we wouldn't have play and earn or play to earn. That proof of concept wouldn't exist. So it's going back to the idea that you win or you learn. There was a lot of learnings from Axie, a lot of good learnings and things that were done well, and also things that we had no idea that this would be a negative impact based on the way the tokenomics were designed, and it just means we iterate and we improve. The issue in the space is when there's something that's successful, you get thousands of other people copying, they copy and paste of the code of everything, and we saw so many different Axie copycats, and then everyone thinks, oh, this is going to be the next Axie. Let me jump in. I might buy one of these cute pets for some cents and hopefully go after hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, and I can be rich. And that's another issue in the space, is we've attracted speculators, or the majority of people in the space are speculators, and all they're after is an ROI. And we've done that because of just incentivizing people to come into ecosystems. Most of the time, if you want to enter an ecosystem, regardless of what that is, we're motivated to do so. Like, if no one moves to earn, if I want to go to the gym or if I want to lose weight or get fit, I do so because I'm motivated to do so, not because there's an earning potential at the end of it. So I think that's another reason why we've seen these boom bust cycles happen as well.
Yeah, and I guess when everyone look back and look at Axie and Step N, it's so easy, so convenient to say, I told you it's a Ponzi scheme. But to be honest, they drove a lot of innovation. They inspire a lot of industry veterans to actually get to where we are at today, and we actually learn from it. So we cannot undermine that inspiration, and we actually all learn a lot from it. Speaking of my favorite project, actually, I'm not sure if you guys heard of TinyTap, and it's an education platform. And it's actually a UGC educational content platform that has an 8 million family audience, right? And then all the teachers or non-teachers or teachers wannabe, they can create their own content with games, right? And then with the kids about age 3 to 5 to actually learn from it by playing games. And if you think about it, teachers as a group, like Mo, for the past 10 years as a teacher, create a lot of content and bring in a lot of value to the students and to the world because you guys are the next generation. But then the teachers is the most underpaid, one of the most underpaid group of occupations. So with NFT and Web3 actually bring the digital asset ownership back to the teachers and allow them putting a financial system on top of that allow them to monetize, and as well as to incentivize people to create an alternative education curriculum, right? Something that you can never learn outside of school is sustainability or something else you actually religious studies actually never get to learn at school, right? So by incentivizing through NFT and Web3 and ownership, it actually inspire a lot of teachers wannabe, providing them support, providing them IPs to actually drive the audience and broadcast that to the mass audience and inspire the next generation.
I think to add to what Kenneth was saying about TinyTap, we'll speak about TinyTap from a business perspective of what it was like prior to tokenization and then where the innovation was. And to Kenneth's point, there were 8 million registered parents on there. Teachers create content in the form of games that the pupils or the kids go and play, and parents also pay a subscription, and then based on the amount of time that's spent, there's then a revenue share with the teachers. Now, what we did and where the innovation came from is the courses that were generating the most revenue. We then bundled these together and sold them as an NFT. And what this NFT is actually, it's what we're calling it is a co-publisher NFT. And what this allows an investor is actually a yield on their investment. So I know that these sets of courses are generating some form of money based on the subscription, the revenue share model that I described earlier. But now, as a teacher, I think we sold 6 courses. The highest course sold for, I think, $55,000, and the teachers got half of that. Now that's at least 50% of their annual salary they got in one drop. Now, as Kenneth was saying, and I was a teacher and I can confirm this, no one is in the teaching profession for the money. Maybe the holidays, but definitely not the money. So to be able to use your content that you've generated to generate a substantial amount of money, and we're talking what, $27,500, that's a lot of money. And for a teacher, after tax, maybe that's what you're getting. So maybe that is a teacher's wage. So for us, that's a game changer.
I think also another way to look at it is we're using the technology to create an innovative mechanic, but actually the financial transaction that's happening is traditional publishing. So all you're doing is you're enabling peer-to-peer publishing. So rather than the teacher going to an educational publisher and getting an advance on their work and getting paid for that, we're actually connecting individuals who are interested in being their publisher to do that on a peer-to-peer basis. And we can do that because of the technology.
I guess if you put this in the analogy of a game, right? We talked about someone can buy their way in and kind of jump the queue, and then you can start earning. You can see the teachers are those who don't want to jump the queue. They want to create things from scratch and then tokenize the content and then monetize it. And then there are also people who can jump the queue by buying the NFT and then earn the yield from it, right? So if you think about it, like we probably see game economy and also like a real life economy as like 2 parallel universes, but technically in real life we're playing a game, and teachers is part of the game, right? And it applies not only in education, it applies in healthcare, it applies in anywhere.
So what you're saying is we could replace Imperial with an education platform. And then
It's coming.
it's coming. If any professors are in the room, watch out.
First we have to license the brand name.
All right. What's else to say? Gameplay. Right. I went to Breakpoint, as I mentioned before. The first day we had a games day. It was like a massive center of all the games in the Solana ecosystem, and you could just go to one game after another and play them. Gameplay was interesting. It was I would say it's making progress. What sort of things do you want to see improve in the gameplay scene?
Excuse me. I think first of all, whatever you saw probably wasn't very good. And
It wasn't.
Well, no, and I can say that candidly because Solana's been under development for less time than a AAA game, right? Solana's only like a year and a half old or so, and if you want to make a serious game, that'll take you 3 years, and $100 million. If you look at something like the high watermark, like Grand Theft Auto, you're talking about a couple $100 million bucks. But still, even just a regular AAA title, you're talking about $3 or $5 million budgets and at least 18 months of time, if not 2 years. So good games take time, and there's no circumventing the time. It's like making a movie or something else. It's a big creative undertaking. And so I think one of the things that we're seeing over time is we're seeing more and more quality as the industry progresses because we just have more time to develop stuff, like Phantom Galaxies that Mo was referring to. We started developing that 3 years ago, right? The sandbox has been in development for almost 5 years, based on a game concept. The first version is 10 years old now. So these things do take time. So I think that I have zero concern about the level of quality of games in the industry, because if you think back, I don't know if anybody played mobile games in 2009, but they were pretty shit, right? Because the platform was brand new. And so people were still innovating. And it wasn't until Rovio came out with the swiping mechanic of Angry Birds, and people were like, oh, that's cool. But you'll remember the year before that, everybody tried to make joysticks on the phone interface because we were used to having joysticks, and that was the game interface. But it didn't work on mobile. And so we needed to experiment with the platform to get better at it. And I think that's what's happening now in blockchain.
Thank you. And we also have a few, at least a couple I know, devs that are trying to get into the gaming space and perhaps the Web3 gaming space. What advice do you have for them?
Where's money? Speak to money right here. No, honestly, it's aside from speaking to money, it's educate yourselves first and foremost. Understand what you're getting yourself into, in a good way, of course. But it's also a learning journey, because we're in an innovative space, and it's not necessarily what it seems to be on the outside. It's not all glim and glam. It is a lot of hard work. So we're in a startup environment, so there's a lot of long hours as well. So it's you need to grind. Would be my advice.
And for startups in the Web3 gaming space, what is the sort of landscape now? How easy is it to raise? Yeah.
So I think the first thing that you should do, and this advice actually I've been giving to people for years, and it doesn't change regardless of market condition: build community. Because Web3 gives you the tools that we've never had before in the game business, where you actually don't need upfront money. It's very unusual. Traditionally, to make games, you need a bunch of money up front. You need to go make an MVP, and then you go out and you try it. And if it doesn't work, then, whoever you borrowed the money from, that's it, right? Whereas in the Web3 community, because content is decoupled from the game experience, you can sell an NFT collection, and then in advance of the game itself, you can start to build a community on the back of that. So you can actually have the community help to support the creation of the project, provided the community is excited about it, right? So you have to have a compelling story. You can start with anime, you can start with all kinds of other content that is not so sort of cost and labor intensive, perhaps, from an investment standpoint. So you can really build up from the grassroots. So I think there's actually never been a better time to be a game dev.
Okay, sorry, I might be going all over the place, but Mo, you mentioned before one way of revenue generation was that you'd have advertisements. So in the Web2 space, the way advertisements are they're sort of targeted towards you, right? You're the product, and that's because they use your data to sell it. But that whole ethos isn't really something acceptable in the Web3 space. So how do advertisement agencies or people who want to advertise things in a metaverse navigate that?
So I think I semi-answered that question before, but we'll go through it again. I'm actually being paid for watching this advertising now. So it's not the case that it's just my data has been leveraged, and that's a slightly different question we'll get into. But I've watched an advert, and I've been paid for that advert. Or I've been paid a sum of money. Right now, if I'm a content creator and I upload content on YouTube, the videos that play in front, the advertisements, I get the pennies, I get the crumbs from that as a YouTube creator. YouTube get most of that, and the people watching get nothing. So you, as someone going to consume content, you watch a couple of ads, you get absolutely nothing. So that's the current model that exists in a Web2 sense, but that's changing from leveraging the blockchain technology in the back end. Going into the other side in terms of ownership of data, well, leveraging again blockchain technology and leveraging certain aspects of pseudo-anonymity and zero-knowledge proofs, you can now be paid for your data. So you might say, X company wants these pieces of information. They want to know gender, they want to know your geolocation, and they want to know your age, and they're willing to pay this amount for it. And now I have a choice whether I want to sell my data to this entity or not. So I think there's two separate things, but what the technology allows us to do is actually be paid for our data, regardless of which form it falls under.
Yeah, I guess the YouTube model is pretty interesting, right? Because if you think about it on, let's say, Sandbox, or there's a racetrack, and then you own that portion of the land or that portion of the racetrack, and then you put an advertisement kind of banner there, who actually gets paid for audience seeing that banner ad, right? So should the content owner kind of get paid? Because that content owner is able to drive traffic to that space, there are a lot of people passing by and driving brand alignment, brand awareness. So the content creator is putting in effort, driving traffic, and at the end, the content owner owns that space, putting the advertisement up there, and the brand, it creates value for the brand. The brand is willing to pay for that value, and then the content creator gets the money. So in terms of advertisement and in the metaverse, probably that's the right way to do it. And actually, we're working on that.
And would you say you would use a similar model for content distribution? So like, for example, if you're on TikTok, there's always a constant feedback loop, right? Because of what you're consuming on the app. And it's gotten to a point where even people have started using TikTok to search things instead of Google. And so, yeah, would you say that a similar model is used for like putting content in front of you in the metaverse? As in using, like, asking people what sort of data like asking users for a certain piece of data and then using that to target content distribution.
Well, I think the beauty about blockchain is all the data is open, right? And then if I need to target someone with what they like or don't like, actually everything is open and everyone can see that. So in order to create that, for example, there's another content creator, which is an AI machine learning engineer. And that AI machine learning engineer, the product that they build and the content that they build is the model. And that model can actually be owned by the AI engineer. And so whoever uses that can actually pay that AI engineer because the AI model is like the content. And then to use on-chain data to actually render images, to render the right brand messages, content to the audience. So actually the whole economy would be very efficient when the data is open and when there is a system on top where people can monetize and tokenize assets and content.
Thank you. I think I'm out of questions. Does anyone in the audience have any questions they want to ask the panelists?
Hi, I'm John, and I've got two questions. So my first question is, do you guys have kids?
I have two.
Alright, my second question would be,
That's it. You just want to ask it.
my second question would be like, when your kids like grow up, or like for you guys, if you guys plan to have kids in the future, they'll be growing up in a world where I guess like the metaverse would be very like happening, and I guess like as you guys said, the barrier to entry to these kinds of things would be blurred. I mean like the lines between like the digital and the physical would be kind of blurred. So how do you guys plan on like raising kids, navigating from?
By moving to a remote island with no internet. And as easy as that.
I actually think that, to go back to something I said earlier, I think it's actually going to be a much healthier environment, because one of the problems we have, I think a lot of the sort of negative aspects of Web 2 come from not just the centralization of the platforms, which means we have no control as consumers over how the platforms operate, but also the fact that if you think about most of the platforms monetize through advertising, and so as a result, we've created this attention economy. And if there's another economic model for people to make money, so for example, through digital ownership, then it doesn't necessitate us spending all our time and our attention in front of content. So the content is not then designed to addict you to watching it and spending all your time watching it. So for example, like somebody comes into the Sandbox and buys some creation, and spends money on it. Do I care whether they spend all day long playing with it in the Sandbox? No, not any more than I care, whether you drive your car all day long. If you bought it, Ford is happy or Volkswagen is happy you bought it. They don't care how many hours a day you drive it. So I think we have different economic models in Web3 that hopefully can lead to healthier engagement models as well.
Brandon Mason. In your opinion, what would be the catalyst for mass adoption in Web3? Because I like to think when things are created, it should be easy enough to understand if my mum can, use it and understand it. So yeah, what would be?
We need to stop selling the tech. First and foremost, because most people, quick show of hands, how many of us know how the internet actually works? Okay, and that's exactly my point.
Self-selected community though.
It's yeah, so that's one aspect. It's the front end for in a lot of cases, because if you want our mums, our grandparents, whoever to be coming in to access these platforms, they would need to abstract all of the blockchain away in most cases. And then once they're in the ecosystem, if I then generate an NFT that I don't know is an NFT, and a few months later I realize this is actually worth a lot of money, then I'm happy to go through the pain points of signing up to an exchange, getting a MetaMask wallet, KYCing, sending Ethereum from here to there, bridging it to Polygon. And I probably lost half of you already because that's how difficult it is to enter the ecosystem right now. But again, to Robbie's point earlier, we're still very early. And a lot of the tooling in Web3 is very early. So we talk about custodial wallets, or now we're talking about pseudo custodial wallets where they have properties of both. And we need to make sure the tech is in place prior to us building the next layer. But with that said, to a point I was making earlier, like a lot of big brands are involved. So people will be using blockchain technology of actually realizing that they're using blockchain technology. And I think from that point, which will be sometime in the next, in my opinion, 3 to 5 years, there'll be an inflection point, and within 12 months, everyone will be like, oh, this is blockchain. These are NFTs. Even hopefully by then we won't be saying NFTs, but because NFTs, it's a big value capture because there's so many different types of NFTs. And I guess while on the topic of NFTs, to help us imagine what an NFT is, think of it as a digital container that you can put anything inside. And we're just starting to see what we can put inside. We've seen PFPs put inside. We've seen in-game assets put inside. As you were speaking about, or Phantom Galaxies, or putting tokens inside. But what we can put inside an NFT, it's infinite in my opinion, because there's an infinite amount of possibilities.
And I would say the mass adoption is, I would see this as like a breakpoint of kind of mass adoption from the conferences that I've been to. And all the builders talk about what they're building is actually, most of them became Web3 onboarding tools. How do you make it seamless, agnostic, transparent for everyone to use, right? If you think about it, like 6 months ago, 12 months ago, NFT summer, DeFi summer, no one cares about those kind of tools, right? If you're building those tools, you don't raise money. Whatever protocol, DeFi protocol, you farming protocol, you just fork it and you raise like millions of dollars. But now everyone is building tools to onboard the next billion users, right? And gaming is just one of the portals, and there are a lot of other portals, right? So definitely is very bullish on mass adoption, and it's happening. I guarantee you, yeah.
I think also one thing to think about is that Web3 is really good at creating economic models to allow small communities of highly engaged users to be able to support a product that they love. And so one of the things that we've seen is, you don't need to have a product that has tens or hundreds of millions of users in it to be able to sustain the creation of that product. Like if we made a game on mobile and it had less than 15 million downloads, I would shut it down right away, because there's no way you're going to be able to pay your team, right? Because 2% of the users actually spend money in the game, and you make a few cents a user per month. Like the economic model doesn't sustain that, so you have to be acquiring huge numbers of users. In a Web3 economy where you have everybody spending money, and they spend relatively more money because they own stuff, which they can then sell later, it's a very, very different model. So I think mass adoption will actually look more like everybody using Web3, but we're all going to be using different things. We're not all going to be using the same thing. Whereas in Web 2, there are 5 or 6 websites that consume most of our time on the internet, right? Whereas Web 3, it's going to be millions of different, very small communities. And that's going to be actually the brilliance of it.
Hugo?
Hugo,
better, a bit different, but also allow regulators to allow this to happen? And the second question is, what are your interactions with regulators like currently? Are they approaching you? Are they talking to you? They're quite nervous about the space, it's fair to say. Ofcom, the head of Ofcom recently was talking about how it's going to be regulated under the Internet Safety Bill, and that could have huge implications for how the Earth Centre works. I'd love to get your thoughts generally on that.
Do you want me to take this one? Okay, so I think most discussions with regulators start from one very particular perspective, which is regulators think about Facebook because Facebook's their biggest problem, right? And so when they think of the metaverse, they think of the Facebook version. When they think of the internet, they think of online harm and bullying and misinformation and all of the problems that we have with Web 2. Whereas from a Web 3 context, we don't really think of those problems. Number one, because it's too small. So honestly, we don't have a lot of that yet, just because of the nature of the audience that's in Web 3 at the moment. Those, evils of the world will come as mass adoption comes, because not all people are nice. But I think most of the engagement with regulators at the moment comes through the aspects that government is looking to play a key role in. So number one, making sure that if there are transactions where people make money, how do they pay taxes on it? That's a big one. If there are financial transactions, how do you make sure that it's being done in a safe way so that people are not being scammed and they're not being marketed to inappropriately? How do you deal with age verification or privacy issues or GDPR? These are very important issues. So I think some of that is going to be accomplished with zero knowledge proofs. I think we're going to hopefully have I'm hoping for a technical solution to the idea of being able to share personal and private data without actually sharing it, if you know what I mean. But I think most importantly, we have to think that if we're engaging in a world where you have ownership and financial transactions, then it's very important that we think about KYC and we think about paying taxes on things, because a lot of people in the early adopter phase of Web3 thought, oh, well, this is anonymous and we shouldn't pay taxes. And honestly, you should be happy to pay taxes. It means you made money, right? It's a good problem to have compared to Web 2, where you just, you spend and that's it. Of course, you don't pay taxes because you are only spending. So I think these things are good problems to have. But the problem we have now with regulation is regulation always trails technology by quite a long way. So the regulators are still just trying to figure out what to do with Web 2 social media at the moment, for the most part.
Yeah.
Hi, actually a question regarding the inflation, all the aspects you mentioned about Ponzi scheme, Metaverse, and all the Metaverse. So when you said about how can you actually plan and simulate, create a simulation of the inflation when you've got a project which is parameters, but at the same time you can have a bridge and you can have an open metaverse, but you don't have control, because you're saying about the incentives as well. People will be going just to get some reward, get some money, and you've got no control on the flow of that rewards and where they're gonna use it and spend it. So yeah, that's the question. So how do you simulate that?
So I think the first thing is to understand that, to genuinely acknowledge that you can't. And I think it's very important to do that. And there's a number of reasons why. Number one, some of the problems you'll be trying to solve will be problems 3, 4, 5 years from now. But we don't know what the tooling is going to look like in 3, 4, 5 years' time. We also don't know what kind of innovations are going to happen in that time. So what we try and do is start off by building a very solid foundation. So you build the foundation first based on the tooling that we know, based on the market conditions, based on whatever the vibe that's happening in the space is, and based on the research that's been done and the learnings that have been done. You build a solid foundation, and then you build from there alongside your community, because we genuinely don't know what the future holds. I think that's something that even in my role, I had to have that mindset change, because when you're used to delivering a product, you're used to delivering a product that's complete. But by delivering a complete product, you're making so many assumptions about what the future holds that the first 2 layers might be correct, but the rest of it isn't correct, because you might have an innovation that all of a sudden, actually, our whole design, which is now a closed ecosystem, not closed in terms of interoperability, but closed in terms of how it's been designed, is now useless because someone else has come and innovated on that, and no one's using this technology anymore. So you have to be very careful, and it's within that you have to be dynamic as well. Having said that, a lot of the time when you start off, you don't have users, so you don't have any genuine data, and a lot of the data that is generated within crypto is maybe spoiled data or dirty data because it's based off of speculators. You get multiple accounts. There's so many different things and challenges that we're trying to solve right now. And when I say we, it's not just us, it's a lot of other actors in the space as well. So I guess to give you a condensed answer, it's build a solid foundation, build with the future in mind, be dynamic, and also you have to be very reflective, and data is a strong tool once we have data.
Always having like the gate open and adapt to the current situation.
100%. Yeah. And I think one more thing is when we haven't really spoken about governance in terms of DAOs. And for anyone who's not familiar with the DAO, I'm going to bore you for 30 seconds. It stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And essentially all it is, it's a way of organizing people to make decisions. That's it. But the idea is within these different game, or within any ecosystem, not necessarily a game ecosystem, it's the core team. They're the ones who understand what's needed for the ecosystem at the beginning. And then as the ecosystem grows and as the community begins to add more value and builds up reputation, and this is something very important, as you start to build up reputation within an ecosystem, then when we start asking community members to vote on things, there's a reputation score there. So we know that this person actually understands this aspect of what they're voting on. So if let's say the three of us are voting on something to do with tokenomics and it's one person, one vote, you two can outvote me, but that doesn't make any sense. So, but then that's where the reputation layer comes in. If it's a vote on tokenomics and actually I have a higher voting power, for example, than both of you, but if it's something that's marketing based, you have more knowledge, then your voting power will be more than us based on your reputation within that. So I can go on for hours about this, by the way. So this is just
Or the time they spend, let's say voting, because I can have more tokens, let's say, or more assets, and why I should have more, be more decisive of my decisions could be pointless and worthless.
Go for it.
So in the 19th century, it used to be that you had to own land to vote in many countries, and it was exactly the same problem. And then we came up with democracy, which still doesn't work that well. But what do they say? It's the least worst form of government. It's the worst form of government except for all the others. But I think it's the same thing. I think you have to acknowledge the fact that when you create this economy, you cannot control everything. And as game designers, we have a knee-jerk, need to try to maniacally control everything because that's how we were taught to make games traditionally. But in a Web3 open economy, you only have certain tools the same way you do in a physical economy. You're the central banker. You can decide on inflation and monetary supply. You can decide on taxation, but those are only big blunt instruments that kind of steer it in certain directions because ultimately it's up to the community. It's a live marketplace.
Okay, I think on that note, we'll have to wrap up. If you have any more questions, feel free to come up to the panelists. I'm sorry, we're out of time. But I've also distributed like job opportunities at Animoca. So students, if you're interested, then scan that QR code. And we also have pizza. And so stick around. And for the students here, there are also people in industry everywhere in this room. And so make the most of this opportunity. Thank you for coming, and just a quick round of applause for our panelists. Hi.